She blocked me from my brother's wedding only, for the bride to refuse to say I do without me there. I stood outside the doors, humiliated, while laughter and music filled the hall I wasn't allowed to enter. For a moment, I thought I had lost everything: my place in my brother's life, my worth in my own family. But then the bride's voice cut through the silence, demanding that the ceremony stop until I was brought inside. To understand why this moment shook everyone to their core, I need to take you back to the beginning, when my brother and I believed nothing could come between us. From the moment I could walk, my brother was already there, holding my hand like it was his responsibility to guide me through the world. He was older by just a couple of years, but in my eyes he was larger than life. To me, he wasn't just my brother, he was my best friend, my protector, the one person I thought would never let me down. Our childhood was stitched together with secret codes, late-night whispers, and promises made under the covers when the lights went out. He was the one who taught me how to ride a bike, running behind me in the summer heat until I found my balance. And when I finally wobbled away on my own, he clapped like he'd just witnessed the birth of a legend. We weren't the kind of siblings who fought constantly like others around us. Sure, we bickered over silly things: who got the last cookie, who had to take out the trash, but it always ended with laughter, with one of us breaking the tension because neither of us could stand being angry at the other for long. The truth was simple: I adored him, and he adored me. We didn't just share blood, we shared a bond that made outsiders shake their heads in disbelief. I remember one afternoon in middle school when a group of kids cornered me in the hallway, mocking me for my clothes, for my hair, for whatever reason bullies invent to feel powerful. I held my books close to my chest, trying to shrink into myself, when suddenly I heard his voice cut through the noise. "Back off." That was all he said, but the way he said it made the group scatter like frightened animals. My brother didn't have to throw punches, he had presence. And that presence told the world, hurt her, and you'll answer to me. Moments like that built my trust in him brick by brick, until I felt invincible with him by my side. When I fell off my bike and scraped my knees bloody, he carried me all the way home, refusing to let me walk. When he got in trouble for climbing the diet old oak tree in our backyard and fell, breaking his arm, I ran to get help, tears blinding me, screaming for Dad until he came running. We had this unspoken pactive: one of us was in pain, the other would bleed too. And it wasn't just in childhood. As we grew older, our bond grew deeper. High school, college, all the phases where siblings often drift apart, we didn't. If anything, we clung tighter. On nights when my heart was broken by careless boys, he was there with ice cream and words like, "Anyone who doesn't see your worth doesn't deserve you." When he failed his driver's test the first time, I was the one who sat with him in the driveway, convincing him he wasn't defined by that moment. We weren't perfect, but we were perfect for each other. Two puzzle pieces, jagged in places, but always locking together when it mattered most. People around us noticed, and not always kindly. At family gatherings, aunts and cousins whispered behind their hands, "They're too close." Friends would tease him, asking if he'd ever get a girlfriend, with me always tagging along. Sometimes I felt embarrassed, like maybe they were right, maybe we were clinging too hard to each other. But every time doubt crept in, he silenced it with a simple truth: "You're my best friend. That's never going to change." Those words carried me through storms. They were my shield when the world felt cold. But even shields crack over time. I didn't notice it at first, the little shifts in his attention, the excuses for not calling back right away, the moments when his eyes seemed to be on something or someone else. At first, I chalked it up to life. He was growing up, carving out his own path. I told myself it was normal. But a part of me, a scared, quiet part, wondered if maybe those whispers I'd heard at family dinners were right. Maybe someone could wedge themselves between us. The fear was always there, lurking, but I pushed it down. Because nothing, I thought, nothing could undo the years of loyalty, the promises, the unbreakable bond we had built. But I was wrong. Because the day came when he introduced me to someone new. Someone who didn't just want a seat at his table, they wanted the whole table to themselves. Someone who looked at me, not as his sister, not as his best friend, but as competition. And from the very first moment I met her, I felt it, the chill, the calculation, the unspoken message in her smile. I'm here now. And there's no room for you. I never could have imagined then that the same woman would stand in front of a church one day, blocking me from walking through the doors to my own brother's wedding. But that moment started here with her entrance into our lives. And from the second she arrived, everything began to change. I'll never forget the first time I met her. It was at a family barbecue, one of those summer afternoons, where the air smelled like grilled corn and smoke clung to everyone's clothes. My brother walked in, smiling wider than I'd seen in months, and by his side was her. She looked polished, too polished for our backyard. A sundress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Heels sinking into the grass. A smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At first glance, I wanted to like her because she was important to him. But there was something off. You know when someone scans you up and down, as if they're calculating your worth? That was the look she gave me. "Hi," she said, her voice honeyed but sharp. "So you're the sister he talks about all the time." The way she said it, I couldn't tell if it was a compliment or a warning. From the very beginning, it felt like she was testing me. Like every word, every glance, was part of some invisible competition I never signed up for. During dinner, she clung to my brother's arm, laughing too loudly at his jokes, stealing little glances my way, as if to say, "See, has mine now." When I tried to join in, she cut across me with stories of her own, bigger, shinier stories. If I said we used to stay up late watching movies, she'd tell everyone about their romantic nights at rooftop restaurants. If I mentioned childhood camping trips, she'd roll her eyes and say, "Well, not everyone enjoys sleeping in the dirt." It was subtle, but it stung. That night, as the guests left and the grill cooled, I pulled my brother aside. "She's different," I said carefully. He frowned. "Different how?" "I don't know. It's just a feeling." He sighed, shaking his head with that stubbornness I knew all too well. "You always overthink things. She's amazing. Just give her a chance." So I tried. For him, I tried. But over the next few months, the pattern only grew clearer. Whenever I was around, she treated me like an obstacle. If I sat next to my brother, she made sure to wedge herself between us. If I brought up an inside joke, she'd roll her eyes and change the subject. And slowly, I noticed something even worse he started letting her. At first, he brushed off her interruptions, but eventually he began to mirror her. Where once he'd defend me, he now just chuckled along, as if my words carried less weight than hers. It was like watching our bond dissolve grain by grain, and I didn't know how to stop it. The lowest blow came during a family dinner. She leaned across the table, smiling sweetly at me, but speaking to everyone else. "Your brother tells me everything. I mean, we're basically each other's best friends now." Everyone laughed politely. My brother even squeezed her hand. And me? I sat there frozen, my heart sinking as her words hammered into me. Best friends. That was my place. That was our bond. And in that moment, she claimed it right in front of me, daring me to object. But I didn't. I stayed quiet, swallowing the hurt, pretending I didn't care. Because deep down, I thought maybe I was just being jealous. Maybe I was the problem. I didn't know it then, but she wasn't just chipping away at me. She was setting the stage to push me out completely. And the person who noticed what I couldn't see yet was his bride-to-be. The moment she entered the picture, the story changed. When my brother first told me he was bringing someone special to meet me, I'll admit I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. By then, I had already grown weary. Every time someone new entered his life, it seemed to cost me a piece of him. The laughter we once shared, the secrets we once held, the bond that once made me feel invincible. It all seemed to shrink the moment others decided I didn't belong. And after months of enduring the coldness of the woman who had already tried to push me out, I braced myself for more of the same. But when he introduced me to her, the woman who would become his bride, everything felt different. We were sitting in a small Italian restaurant, the kind with candles in old wine bottles and waiters who spoke with thick accents that made every word sound romantic. My brother was nervous, I could tell. He fiddled with the corner of his napkin, cleared his throat too often, and glanced at her like he was trying to read her mind. I expected her to be polished like the others, with a rehearsed smile and perfectly timed laughs. But when she looked at me across the table, her smile wasn't rehearsed at all. It was warm, open, disarming. "Hi," she said, extending her hand without hesitation. "I've heard so much about you. Honestly, I was a little intimidated to meet you. You're so important to him." For a second, I just stared, caught off guard. She wasn't competing with me. She was acknowledging me. She wasn't pretending I didn't matter. She was saying I mattered too much. That single sentence cracked open the wall I'd built around myself. I reached out, shook her hand, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. Dinner that night unfolded like a surprise gift. She didn't dominate the conversation to prove her worth. Instead, she asked questions, real questions. She wanted to know about my childhood with my brother, about our silly traditions, about the bond that everyone else seemed to misunderstand. I told her about our Friday night movie marathons, how we'd argue over who made the better popcorn, and how, without fail, we'd both fall asleep halfway through the film, only to wake up to the credits rolling. She laughed, genuinely laughed, and turned to my brother. "You never told me that part. Falling asleep during your own movie nights. That's adorable." He blushed, chuckling, and for the first time in months, I saw this softness in his eyes, the softness I thought had been lost. Throughout the evening, she wove me into the conversation instead of pushing me out. And it wasn't just polite inclusion, it was intentional, meaningful. She treated me not as an obstacle to her relationship with him, but as a bridge to understanding him better. And with every word, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. I felt like I belonged. In the weeks that followed, she reached out to me directly. Sometimes it was a text, "Hey, do you want to grab coffee?" Other times it was a phone call where she'd chat for an hour about everything from work stress to silly TV shows. What struck me most was how natural it felt. She wasn't doing it out of obligation or to impress me. She genuinely wanted to know me. She wanted me to be part of her life too. Slowly, my guard lowered. Against my own fears, I found myself opening up to her. I told her things I hadn't told anyone outside of my brother. I admitted how I'd been feeling left out, how I missed the closeness we used to share. I expected her to brush it off, but she didn't. She listened. She squeezed my hand across the table and said softly, "You'll always be important to him. I see it every time he talks about you. Don't ever doubt that." Those words, spoken with such sincerity, nearly broke me. Because while my brother had been too distracted, too blind to reassure me, she stepped in and gave me what I needed most: validation. She reminded me I wasn't crazy, that my bond with him wasn't a figment of my imagination. It was real, and it still mattered. But of course, the closer we grew, the more the other woman noticed. She was always watching. At dinners, she'd glare when the bride-to-be leaned close to whisper something to me. At family gatherings, she'd roll her eyes when the bride and I shared a laugh over inside jokes. And then, slowly but surely, she began to lash out in ways that everyone could see. One evening during wedding planning, the bride asked me to help her choose flowers. Her voice was light, but her eyes sparkled with gratitude. She wanted me there. Before I could even respond, the other woman cut in with a sharp tone. "Shouldn't that be a job for the maid of honor? You don't want too many cooks in the kitchen, do you?" I froze, unsure what to say. But before I could even form a response, the bride looked at her and said firmly, "I want her there. This isn't about cooks, it's about family." Her words silenced the room, and I felt a surge of relief wash over me. Someone had stood up for me, and it wasn't just anyone, it was the woman my brother loved. That moment bound me to her in a way I hadn't expected. Still, the attacks didn't stop. They grew sharper. During a family dinner, when I offered to help with decorations, the other woman smirked and said, "Oh, I didn't realize you were on the planning committee." The table chuckled awkwardly, and I felt my cheeks burn. But the bride reached under the table, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "Don't listen. I need you." It was those little gestures, those quiet reassurances that kept me going. She saw what the others didn't. She noticed the war being waged against me and refused to let me fight it alone. She was my unexpected ally, and she gave me back the confidence I had started to lose. One night, after yet another pointed remark from the other woman, I excused myself from the dinner table and stepped outside to get some air. I leaned against the porch railing, fighting the sting of tears, when I felt someone step beside me. It was her, the bride-to-be. She slipped her hand into mine and said quietly, "Don't let her win. When I walk down that aisle, I want you there, right there, by my side." Her words anchored me in a way nothing else could. She wasn't just inviting me into her wedding. She was inviting me into her heart, her life, her family. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. But I also knew, deep down, that our bond had painted a target on my back. The closer we became, the more determined the other woman was to erase me. She could feel her control slipping, and she wasn't going to let it go without a fight. What I didn't yet understand was just how far she was willing to go. because soon her cruelty wouldn't just be whispers in private rooms or subtle digs at family dinners. It would become something bigger, louder, and more humiliating than I could have ever imagined. I wish I could say the cruelty stayed small, sharp words in quiet corners, little cuts I could bandage with patience, but it didn't. It grew teeth. It learned to perform. And the stage it chose was every single moment that should have been joyful in the lead up to my brother's wedding. It started with dress shopping. The bride invited me herself. "I want you there," she said, eyes bright with sincerity. "You know his taste almost as well as I do." I arrived early, clutching coffee and a notebook with swatches and screenshots I thought might help. When I reached the boutique, she was radiant, cheeks flushed, hair pinned loosely, nerves bouncing behind her smile. I hugged her, and for a breath, I felt safe. Then the door chimed again, and she walked in, the woman who had made it a sport to slice me open politely. She greeted the bride with a sugary kiss on the cheek, then turned to me with a smile that didn't move her eyes. "Oh," she said, as if surprised to find me in a room I'd been invited to. "Didn't realize this was open attendance." I swallowed and said nothing. The consultant brought gowns like floating clouds. The bride stepped out in the first dress lace that caught the light like tiny stars, and I gasped despite myself. "You look like everything good I've ever wanted for him," I blurted, hand over my mouth. She laughed and twirled. I saw it then, the future my brother deserved. That's when the sabotage began. The other woman drifted toward the mirrors like smoke. She said, head tilted. "Lovely, but do we really need so many opinions?" She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't have to. Every time I offered something small, maybe a softer veil, or "he always loved clean lines," she cut across my words, louder, brighter, as if to crowd me out with her voice. At one point, when the bride asked what I thought about a satin train, the woman laughed and said, "Well, I suppose childhood nostalgia has its place, but we should aim for mature." The bride's eyes flicked to mine. She saw the flinch I tried to hide. She didn't let it pass. "I asked her," she said evenly, lace hem whispering across the floor as she stepped toward me. "And I care what she thinks. A small thing, a small rescue." But the air changed. For the rest of the appointment, the other woman fell quiet, and I scribbled notes with shaking hands, determined not to ruin a single second of joy. But humiliation, once it tastes attention, gets hungry. At the tasting, she took the seat between me and my brother without asking, sliding into the space like a wedge. Whenever I spoke, she leaned forward and asked the caterer the same question, louder, as if repeating it made it hers. When the pastry chef presented the final cake almond sponge with raspberry and vanilla, Binti, bride, and I grinned at each other like conspirators. "This is it," she whispered, and I nodded. The other woman dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin and said, "It's a bit simple, isn't it?" The chef's face fell. The bride's smile cracked. I felt heat crawl up my neck, the kind that comes when someone pushes past your limits while smiling the whole time. I kept telling myself, don't make waves, don't be the story. The wedding isn't about you. You can endure this. You've endured worse. But endurance without boundaries becomes an invitation to be erased. The rehearsal dinner was where she stopped pretending. The restaurant had tucked us into a private room. Warm lighting, long table, linen napkins folded into tidy triangles. People stood to toast, the kind of earnest, slightly awkward speeches that make your heart swell. My brother's best man roasted him for his inability to parallel park. Our mother cried through a story about his first day of kindergarten. When it was my turn, I stood, hands trembling, and spoke into the soft clink of glasses. I don't have a funny story that isn't embarrassing, I began, and the room laughed. So I'll say this instead. You've been my compass my whole life. And watching you choose someone who loves you, not just loudly, but well, someone who protects him, I nodded to the bride, is the easiest joy I've ever felt. I'm proud of you both. My voice broke on the last line. Applause rose like a wave. My brother's eyes shone. The bride pressed her hand to her heart. Then a voice cut through the warmth. Since we're sharing, the other woman said, standing, smile sharp enough to slice fruit, I just want to acknowledge how challenging it is when siblings are overly involved. It can blur boundaries. Weddings are a new chapter. Some people have a hard time letting go. Chairs scraped. The hush that followed was jagged. My stomach dropped clean through the floor. She wasn't done. But it's nice, she continued, lifting her glass, that everyone is trying. And hopefully after this, we can all find our appropriate places. Appropriate places. The words landed like a verdict. My brother opened his mouth, shock written across his face. But the bride moved first. She stood. Enough, she said, not loud, but final. The room held its breath. This dinner is for love, not for taking shots at the person who has loved him longest. Her eyes were steady. If anyone needs help understanding boundaries, I'm happy to explain mine. Do not humiliate the people I call family. I stared at the linen tablecloth because if I met her eyes, I'd cry in a way that would ruin me. The other woman sat, face polished back, into placidity, but I saw the flicker of something like rage behind her lashes. Attention had been pulled from her grip. She would come for it now with both hands. After dessert, I slipped to the restroom to catch my breath. I ran cold water over my wrists until the shaking slowed. When I emerged, she was waiting near the hallway alone, arms folded, lips shaped into something thin. "Enjoy your moment?" she asked. "It must be exhausting being the main character." "I don't want to be any character," I said quietly. "I want my brother happy." "Good." She leaned in, perfume thick and sweet. "Then stop inserting yourself where you don't belong. Tomorrow is about them, not your little childhood memories." I didn't rise to it. I couldn't afford to. "Tomorrow is about love," I said, and walked away before my composure crumbled. In the car home, the bride texted, "I'm sorry about tonight. I love you. I want you beside me. Please don't let her scare you off." I typed back with my thumbs still trembling. "I'll be there. Try and stop me." But the truth was, my courage was a thin glass. I kept praying wouldn't shatter. The night before the wedding, I laid out everything like armor. Dress steamed, shoes polished, hairpins set in a neat little row. I practiced breathing until the air went in and out without scraping. Every time fear rose. What if she tries something? What if my brother really doesn't defend me? I pressed my palm to my ribs like I could steady my heart through bone. Morning arrived bright and merciless. I sent the bride a photo of my dress with a caption, "Ready when you are." She replied with a flood of hearts. I smiled into my coffee and felt hope unfurl again, stubborn and green. I left early to help with last-minute details, a tote bag looped over my arm. As I turned up the church steps, the heavy doors gleaming under the sun, I saw her at the top landing, already posture regal, smile poised, like a sentinel pretending to be a hostess. "Hi," I said. breath misting despite the warmth. Big day. She hummed. About that, she unfolded a clipboard as if it were a badge. There's been a change to the seating and entry. For the sake of flow. She gestured to the side entrance. Family will use that door. Vendors and extended relations should wait for instructions. Immediate family, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Sister. She looked at the page and then at me with feigned sympathy. Not on my list. It was so simple, so calculated, not a raised voice or a shove. Just a line she redrew to place me outside of it. People began to arrive in little swells. Aunts, cousins, friends in chiffon. I stepped aside to keep from blocking the stairs as she greeted everyone loudly by name, loud enough for them to hear her say to me, "Please don't make this difficult," as if I were the problem. I pulled out my phone and texted the bride. At the door, being redirected. Everything okay? The dots pulsed, stopped, started again. Finally, I'm getting my hair fixed. Stay put. I'm coming. Before she could reach me, the other woman waved to two ushers. Gentlemen, she said, voice bright. If anyone lacks an invitation, have them wait. We're at capacity. Her eyes slid to me. You understand. I had an invitation. I also had a decision. Create a scene and hand her the spectacle she wanted, or hold my ground without giving her my dignity. I chose silence that trembled. Guests slipped past with pity smudged across their faces. Someone touched my elbow gently and murmured, "I'm sure it's a mix-up." Another said, "Just go around." But the message had already spread, the story already seeded. Maybe I wasn't supposed to be here. Maybe I'd come anyway. My brother arrived with the groomsmen for photos, laughter spilling like coins. When he saw me stranded near the column, confusion flickered, then vanished under a handler's instructions and the press of time. He mouthed, "Later?" I nodded because there wasn't room for anything else. The hurt slid under my skin like ice. The bells began to toll. The ushers closed one of the doors, then the other. The foyer emptied as people took their seats. The woman turned to me, hands clasped in perfect politeness. "It's best if you watch from the side hall," she said, like a nurse delivering a kind death. My phone buzzed again. The bride. "Where are you?" I typed, fingers slipping. Still, blocked at the front. And then the music started. Every wedding has that moment when the world holds its breath. The first note, the first step, the quiet choreography of a promise about to be spoken. I stood on the wrong side of a closed door, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, shame burning in my throat, and thought, this is how you lose a person you never thought you'd have to fight for. The woman exhaled, satisfied. "There," she said softly. "Let's keep things peaceful, but peace without justice is just silence." Somewhere inside, commotion rippled a murmur, a ruffle, the whirring hush of 200 people, trying to figure out where to place their eyes. Then, through the heavy wood, a single voice, clear and not quiet. "I'm not walking." It sliced through the organ like lightning. The woman's smile froze at the edges. A second voice, the coordinator's, flustered. A third, my brother's, low and urgent. And then, unmistakable, the bride again stronger now. The way ocean waves sound when they stop apologizing for their strength. "I said I'm not walking until she's here." The ushers looked at each other. The foyer turned electric. The woman blinked slowly, the way a predator recalibrates when the prey refuses to run. She opened her mouth to conjure a new rule, a fresh boundary, another lie about capacity or flow. But the truth had already found the room. And in that instant, with the ceremony on hold and 200 heartbeats waiting, everything I thought was lost began to turn back toward me. The night before the wedding was supposed to be calm, a time for family to gather quietly, to share blessings, to give the couple space to breathe before the storm of the ceremony. But for me, it felt like the hours before, a battle I hadn't chosen yet couldn't avoid. The rehearsal dinner had left scars, and though the bride's words had shielded me that evening, I knew the other woman wouldn't accept defeat. She had tasted attention, and I'd seen the rage flash in her eyes when it was pulled away from her. People like her don't retreat, they plot. I tried to focus on simple things, steaming my dress, polishing my shoes, making sure the little necklace my brother gave me years ago was tucked safely into its box so I could wear it the next day. I brushed my hair until it shone, not out of vanity, but out of nervous energy I couldn't contain. Every task became a ritual, a way of telling myself I was ready, that I belonged, that nothing could push me aside from my brother's day. But the truth was, my mind wasn't calm. My thoughts ran in circles. What if she tried something else? What if my brother, blinded by loyalty or exhaustion, sided with her? What if my presence caused more chaos than joy? At one point, I sat on the edge of my bed, hands gripping the hem of my dress, and whispered out loud, "You deserve to be there. Don't let her take that from you." It was the kind of pep talk you give yourself when no one else can say the words you need to hear. Then, just as I was beginning to steady myself, my phone buzzed. A message. My stomach tightened when I saw her name. The text was short, sharp, and cruel. "Do yourself a favor. Stay home tomorrow. Don't embarrass him." I stared at the screen, blood draining from my face. I could almost hear her voice in the words, the sweet poison dripping through every syllable. For a moment, I thought about deleting it, pretending I hadn't seen it. But the truth was staring me in the face. She was escalating. She wasn't satisfied with subtle digs anymore. Now she was telling me, outright, that I had no place at my own brother's wedding. My fingers trembled as I typed back a single reply. "I'll be there." Then I set the phone down and forced myself not to look at it again. The night stretched long. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock tick. I thought about my brother and all the years we had shared, how he had once promised me that no matter what, we would always be there for each other. I thought about the bride, about the way she had reached for my hand after the rehearsal dinner, her voice steady as she said she wanted me by her side. Those memories became my anchor, the thing I clung to whenever fear tried to drag me under. Eventually, I drifted into a restless sleep filled with strange dream doors that wouldn't open. Voices I couldn't reach, my brother walking away, while I shouted his name. I woke before dawn, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. For a moment I forgot where I was, and then it all came flooding back. The day had come. I rose slowly, showered, and dressed with the kind of care usually reserved for armor. My dress was smooth, my shoes gleamed, my necklace sat cool against my collarbone. I took a deep breath in front of the mirror and whispered, "You belong. No matter what happens today, you belong." Before leaving, I sent the bride a picture of myself, ready. She replied almost instantly with a stream of hearts and a single line. "I can't wait to see you. Don't let anyone stop you." Her words filled me with enough strength to step out the door. I carried a tote bag filled with little things I thought might help: safety pins, tissues, an extra pair of flats. I wanted to be useful, wanted to show that I wasn't just a guest, but family who cared enough to think ahead. As I approached the church, the morning sun glinting off the stained glass windows, I told myself over and over that this was going to be a good day, that no matter what tricks she had planned, love would win. But when I reached the top of the steps, my heart dropped. She was already there, waiting. Her posture was perfect, her smile sharp, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of someone who believes she has the upper hand. She looked at me like she'd been expecting me, like she had rehearsed this moment all night. "Big day," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She hummed, tilting her head. "About that, we'll need to make sure everything runs smoothly. Wouldn't want distractions." She held up a clipboard as if it were some official decree. "There's been a change. Family will use the side entrance. Extended relatives and other guests should wait for instructions." Her words hit like a slap, and though my mouth went dry, I managed to say, "I'm not an extended relative. I'm his sister." Her smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. Not on my list. The words were simple, but their meaning was clear. She was trying to erase me, one rule at a time. And that was when I realized the fight I had been dreading wasn't in my head. It was here, it was real, and it was only just beginning. The church doors towered above me, heavy and carved with intricate patterns, the kind that seemed built to guard sacred promises. Sunlight poured through the stained glass, scattering jewel-toned light across the stone steps. This was supposed to be the moment of arrival, the first breath of joy before the ceremony. But instead, it was the beginning of a nightmare I could never have imagined. She was already there, standing like a sentinel, clipboard in hand, as if she owned the place. Her dress was immaculate, her hair pinned to perfection, her smile practiced. But it wasn't her appearance that chilled me, it was her eyes, cold, calculating, and fixed on me like I was prey, daring to step into her territory. "Good morning," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She hummed, her gaze flicking over me like I was something to be measured and dismissed. "About today, there's been a change. For the sake of order, the family is entering through the side door. Vendors and extended relatives can wait for further instructions." My jaw tightened. "I'm his sister. I'm immediate family." Her lips curved into a smile that felt more like a knife. Not on my list. It was deliberate. It was cruel. And it was public. Guests were beginning to arrive, trickling up the steps in their pressed suits and flowing dresses. They slowed as they noticed the exchange, their eyes darting between us. Whispers flickered like sparks. Already, I could feel the story forming in their minds. Maybe I didn't belong here after all. Heat climbed up my neck, but I forced myself to stand tall. "I have an invitation," I said evenly. "I have every right to be here." She tilted her head, pretending to pity me. "Then why don't you use the other door?" No need to make a scene. The words dripped with poison, designed to make me the problem, the disruption, the one ruining my brother's perfect day. And that was when the choice crystallized. Fight here, now, in front of everyone, or swallow the humiliation and wait for my chance. I chose silence, but it was a silence that trembled. I stepped aside, my back pressed against the cool stone wall, clutching my invitation so tightly the edges dug into my palm. Guests passed me, offering quick smiles laced with pity. Some murmured, "I'm sure it's a mistake," or "Don't worry, it'll sort itself out." But I saw the doubt in their eyes, doubt that she had planted, doubt that she wanted to bloom into full-blown isolation. My phone buzzed in my clutch. It was the bride. "Where are you?" I typed quickly. "At the front, being blocked." The dots appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. "Finally, stay there, I'm coming." Before she could reach me, the woman waved 2 ushers over, her voice bright and falsely cheerful. "Gentlemen, please make sure. Only those on the list are allowed in. We don't want confusion." Her eyes cut to me like shards of glass. "We're at capacity. For a church that could seat 200, she was telling me there wasn't room for his own sister." The bells began to toll. Guests hurried inside, the ushers closing the heavy doors behind them. The foyer emptied until it was just me, the stone wall at my back, and her. She clasped her hands neatly, her smile small and smug. "It's best if you watch from the side hall. Less disruptive." My phone buzzed again. The bride's message burned across the screen. "Tell me you're inside. Tell me you're okay." My thumbs shook as I typed. Still. Blocked. Doors closed, and then it happened. The music began. That sacred hush filled the air, the swell of the organ echoing through the walls. Guests rose to their feet inside, their faces turned toward the back of the aisle. The moment every wedding builds toward was here, and I was on the wrong side of the door, shut out of my brother's life by a woman who had decided I didn't belong. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Shame burned through me, hot and relentless. For a split second, I wondered if maybe this was it. Maybe this was how I lost him. How our bond ended not with a fight, but with a closed door and silence. She exhaled softly, satisfied. "There," she whispered, as though she'd completed a task. "Now let's keep things peaceful." But peace built on injustice is nothing more than silence. Inside, a murmur began. Confusion. A ripple of commotion. Then, through the thick wooden door, a voice rang out clear, strong, and unmistakably hers. "The bride. I'm not walking." The organ faltered, the crowd hushed. Even outside, I felt the shift, the shock, the electricity of 200 people, realizing something had gone terribly off script. The woman's smile froze at the edges. For the first time, she blinked. And then the bride's voice came again, louder this time, steady as a vow. "I said I'm not walking until she's here." The air crackled with tension. The ushers looked at each other, unsure. Guests inside whispered, restless. My brother's voice rumbled low, urgent. The coordinator tried to soothe, but the bride cut across them all, her words carrying through the wood like thunder. "I won't take a single step until his sister is standing where she belongs." The woman in front of me faltered, her mask cracking for the briefest of moments. She opened her mouth to form another rule, another excuse, another lie about capacity or flow. But it was too late. The truth had already found its way into the room. And in that instant, with the ceremony on pause and every heartbeat waiting, I realized that what she had tried to erase was about to be written back in bold, undeniable ink. Inside the venue, it was supposed to be perfect. Every detail had been planned for months. The flowers arranged in sweeping arcs of ivory and blush, the candles glowing in tall glass holders, the aisle runners stretched tight and pristine. Guests shifted in their pews, dressed in silks and suits, fanning themselves with programs that listed each step of the ceremony in careful order. There was an air of expectation, the kind that comes before a big moment everyone knows is about to happen. The organist's hands hovered over the keys, waiting for the signal to begin again. But something had broken the script, something no one could ignore. The bride had not moved. She stood at the end of the aisle, radiant in her gown, bouquet trembling slightly in her grip. The moment that should have been hers, the triumphant walk, the whispers of admiration, the collective sigh as she approached her future stalled, in a silence so heavy it made people squirm in their seats. She had opened her mouth, and instead of reciting vows or smiling shyly, she had spoken words that shattered the illusion of control. "I'm not walking until she's here." The words hit the air like a lightning strike. For a second, it was as if the church itself had forgotten how to breathe. Then came the gasps, the whispers, the shifting of programs. Guests craned their necks toward the doors, trying to glimpse what had caused this rebellion in lace and satin. The officiant looked stunned, his book still open to the first page, lips parted as though he'd lost his place. Bridesmaids exchanged panicked glances, unsure whether to follow her lead or pretend everything was fine. Groomsmen shuffled their feet, their practiced stoicism cracking. And my brother stood at the front, pale, rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscle ticked. He looked at his bride like she had just spoken in another language. And in a way, she had, because the language of truth doesn't always fit neatly into ceremony. I couldn't see the scene with my eyes, but I felt it pressing through the closed doors, through the heavy wood that separated me from the world I thought I was barred from. I imagined every detail, our mother in the first pew, clutching her tissue with both hands, relatives leaning across the aisle to whisper, the officiant tugging nervously at his collar. And above it all, her voice my brother's bride clear, unwavering, carrying across the threshold. Back in the foyer, I stood with my invitation crumpled in my hand, the woman who had blocked me still guarding the door with that false air of authority. Her smile was gone now, her expression sharpened into something brittle. She knew she was losing control of the story. My phone buzzed again, a message from the bride herself. "Are you inside yet?" My thumbs trembled as I typed back, "Still blocked." Doors closed. The dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then her answer came, short and decisive. "Stay there. I'm coming to you." It didn't matter that 200 people were watching, or that tradition dictated she stay at the back of the aisle, poised to glide forward. It didn't matter that cameras were ready, the music waiting, the entire production balanced on her next move. She had made her choice, and then the footsteps came, click, 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 each one sharper than the last, heels striking marble, like drum beats of defiance. Gasps followed her as she pushed open the heavy doors, and light spilled into the foyer. She appeared like a storm, breaking through glass veil pushed back, bouquet steady at her side, eyes burning with a clarity that made my throat ache. Guests rose from their seats to see where she had gone, whispering furiously, some even standing in the aisle to catch a glimpse. And then she was there, right in front of me. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't make a speech for the cameras. She reached for my hand and said only one thing, her voice steady enough to silence the air itself. "You're with me, always." The words cracked something open inside me. For a long time, I had been shrinking, apologizing, trying not to take up space, trying not to be seen as a problem. But her words left no room for doubt. I wasn't a problem. I wasn't an inconvenience. I was family, and she had just declared it in front of everyone. The woman who had blocked me couldn't take it anymore. Her polished authority began to unravel into frantic control. "This isn't appropriate," she sputtered, her voice sharp and too loud for the moment. "We can't continue like this. There are rules, there are assignments, the seating is finalized, there isn't space." The bride turned on her, and the temperature of the foyer shifted. "The only thing out of place," she said, her voice calm but edged with fire, "is cruelty, and we're done with it." The woman faltered, blinking as though she had been slapped. She tried again, fumbling for dignity. "If we bend the rules for her, then everything falls apart. This ceremony is supposed to be about the couple, not the bride's." Voice cut her clean. "Listen to me. If his sister isn't inside, I'm not saying I do. That's not a request, that's a promise." The impact of her words reverberated through the church. Guests leaned in, murmuring. Some gasped outright. The ushers shifted, uncertain. The coordinators paled. And my brother finally moved. He stood at the altar, the aisle stretching out. Before him, the weight of 200 eyes pressing down. And then, slowly, he stepped forward. Each stride echoed through the silence as he walked down the aisle, past the flowers, past the whispers, past the confusion. He walked toward me, toward us. When he reached the doors, his voice cracked with something raw. "I'm sorry," he said, looking at me, then at her. "Walk with us." It wasn't a grand speech. It wasn't rehearsed. It was the simplest truth he could offer, and it was enough to shatter the last of my doubt. We turned together, the three of us, and stepped back inside. The organist, who had been holding his hands in midair, finally pressed the keys, and the music swelled, not timidly, but with a fullness that made the whole building vibrate. The guests rose again, but this time their eyes weren't just on the bride. They were on me, too, on us, walking side by side, as if the aisle itself had been waiting for this correction. The atmosphere shifted. The whispers softened into something like awe. The tension that had coiled tight loosened into something better, something real. A few people even dabbed their eyes, as if the truth of it all had cracked them open too. As we passed the pews, I caught glimpses of faces on Aunt, who had avoided my gaze earlier now, mouthing the word good through her tears. A bridesmaid straightening her shoulders with pride. A cousin nodding as though justice had just been served. Even the officiant seemed steadier when we reached the front, as though the spine of the day had finally aligned. At the first pew, the bride released my hand, only to place it deliberately over my brother's. It was a small gesture, but it sealed the apology between us. She wasn't just marrying him, she was binding me back into the family where I belonged. She turned to the guests then, unflinching, unapologetic. "Thank you for your patience," she said. "We can begin now." It wasn't an excuse, it wasn't a plea. It was a statement of truth. The ceremony had been waiting for justice, and now justice had arrived. We took our places. The officiant opened his book, and the readings began. But they didn't sound the same as they had during rehearsal. When a cousin read, "Love does not boast, it is not proud, it always protects, always trusts, always hopes," the words rang truer because we had just seen them lived out. When another read about love being patient and kind, people nodded, eyes still glassy, because patience and kindness had just changed the shape of the day. Then came the vows. My brother spoke first, his voice rough but clear. "I thought love meant keeping everything easy. keeping everyone calm, smoothing things over. But today I learned love is standing up for what's right, even when it's messy, even when it hurts. Thank you for teaching me that. I promise to choose you and to honor the people who made us who we are. His eyes flicked toward me, no words needed. The promise was there. When the bride spoke, her voice was as steady as the morning sun. I promise to walk beside you in joy and in pain, to protect the home we build from cruelty and smallness, to honor your past and to honor your family, including your sister, especially your sister. The guests made a sound half sob, half laugh, the involuntary sound people make when truth is spoken aloud and everyone feels it together. The rings were exchanged, the vows sealed. When the officiant pronounced them married, the applause wasn't just for their kiss. It was for the fact that love had refused to move forward without me. And yet, even as the room swelled with relief and celebration, I caught sight of her, the woman who had tried to erase me. She sat rigid in her pew, face smoothed back into something neutral, but her eyes darted quickly, already scanning for someone to whisper to, already preparing her version of the story. I could almost hear the words shed use. It was a misunderstanding, or she was late, or things got confused at the door. But this time, she wouldn't be allowed to twist the truth. Not with the bride on one side of me, my brother on the other, and the entire congregation having seen what really happened. The ceremony had gone forward, the marriage had begun, but the story wasn't finished yet because she was going to try one last time. When the ceremony ended, the room didn't burst into chaos so much as it exhaled. People rose from the pews, still blinking back tears, hugging in soft clusters, talking in hushed tones that sounded like gratitude. The bride's hand was warm in mine. My brother's arm brushed my shoulder as we moved together down the aisle. Love had reset the day, but the story wasn't finished yet, and I could feel it in the way heads tilted toward one corner of the room where she stood composed, calculating, already assembling a new version of events. She moved fast. As the guests filed toward the reception hall, she slipped into a small circle of relatives and began with that practiced tone of concern. It was just a misunderstanding at the door, she said too smoothly. She didn't have the right entry. We were trying to keep things organized. You know how crowded it gets. One cousin nodded uncomfortably, eager to avoid conflict. Another pressed her lips together as if she believed it. Lies do that they collect in corners where people don't want to stand up. I watched her for a beat, feeling the old fatigue tug at me, the instinct to let it go, to choose peace over truth. But then the bride touched my arm, a gentle pressure like a nudge from courage itself. "Let's end it," she murmured. "Not later, not in a text thread, I'll hear, now." Where the damage had been attempted, we crossed the room together, the bride on one side, my brother on the other, and the group fell quiet when we arrived. She turned to greet us, her smile already forming the next revision. "Oh, good," she said lightly. "I was just explaining." "No," the bride said, one word clean as glass. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried like a bell. Conversations around us softened into a wider hush. "You're not going to explain this for me. I will." The bride faced the little circle, then let her gaze widen to the guests nearby, who had paused to listen. "There was no confusion at the door," she said evenly. She blocked his sister from entering. "I left the aisle because cruelty dressed as organization is still cruelty. We don't do that in this family. Eyes swung back to the woman who had orchestrated it. The cushion of plausible deniability dissolved. The woman tried to recover with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "That's not fair," she said quickly. "We had capacity issues and time pressure. She wasn't on my list. I was trying to help." If she had just gone around, my brother stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You didn't help," he said. "You humiliated my sister, and you tried to make her carry the shame for what you did." He glanced at me then, the apology from the aisle now spoken in front of witnesses. "That ends today." She opened her mouth, but before the next excuse could escape, our mother moved in from the edge of the circle. I hadn't even seen her approach. She stood smaller than the storm in front of her, but somehow taller than the hurt we'd all been breathing. "I watched you," she said quietly to the woman. "I watched you greet every cousin by name and then turn your shoulder in front of my daughter. I know the difference between a mistake and a choice." She lifted her chin. "You chose." The bride nodded once in agreement, then looked to the coordinator, who had been hovering at a polite distance. "Please remove her from any role that gives her authority today," she said. "She is a guest now, nothing more." The coordinator hesitated, then nodded and made a note. Relief flickering across her face, like someone who had finally been given permission to stop enabling a problem. The woman's composure cracked, hairline at first, and then in a rush. "You're overreacting," she snapped. "This is petty. This is honest," the bride said, not flinching. "And it is final." The hush around us thickened as people recalibrated. Some looked embarrassed to have believed the softer story. Others looked grateful that the clean version of truth had been laid down where everyone could see it. That's the thing about clarity. Even those who resisted it often feel lighter once it's named. We didn't linger there to gloat. The bride squeezed my hand, and the three of us moved toward the reception hall, leaving the wreckage of spin behind us. The ballroom doors opened on light and laughter, glasses catching chandeliers, linen sparkling, the band testing their chords. When we entered together, a round of applause rose again, unprompted, warm, the kind that says, "We saw what mattered and we're still here for it." Dinner settled into a buzz of clinking cutlery and relief. The toasts came, and they were different than rehearsed. People spoke less like performers and more like participants in a story they felt lucky to witness. The best man scrapped half his jokes and said, "I had 5 minutes on his terrible parallel parking, but I watched him learn a better skill today." The room laughed. He lifted his glass toward me, "Choosing the right people to stand with you." The bride's maid of honor followed with something gentle and fierce. "Love is a boundary as much as it is a bridge. You showed us both today." Between courses, relatives filtered to our table in 2s and 3s, offering quiet apologies that didn't ask me to comfort them in return. My aunt squeezed my shoulders from behind and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't say anything on the steps. I should have." I met her eyes. "Thank you for saying it now," I replied. A cousin asked if I wanted to step outside for air. A family friend slid a folded napkin into my palm, like a secretary little square, embroidered with a blue forget-me-not. "For not being forgotten," she said, her own eyes bright. It was such a small kindness, and it landed like a benediction. Not everything was mended, and not everyone was brave. A handful kept their distance, intent on neutrality's comfort. That's its own kind of answer, but the center held, and it held around what was true. Sometime after the first dance, I found myself at the edge of the floor, watching my brother spin his wife under the lights. The band slid from a waltz into something slower, and their bodies softened into an easy sway. He leaned down to say something that made her laugh, head tipped back, trust written in the curve of her mouth. I felt something unclench in me then, a knot I hadn't even realized it inhaled and never exhaled since the first time I'd felt myself being pushed aside. It loosened, and with it came a steady warmth, not triumph, not vengeance, belonging. That was when she approached me, the woman who had tried to author the day. She came without the clipboard, without the crown of borrowed authority, just a guest moving through a room that no longer reflexively made space for her. I braced anyway, out of muscle memory. "I didn't mean to cause all this," she said, voice flattened, eyes scanning everywhere but mine. "Things get chaotic. You know how weddings are." "I do," I said. "I also know the difference between chaos and cruelty." She flushed, the first honest color I'd seen touch her face. "I was trying to keep order." "You were trying to keep control," I answered, not unkindly. "There's a difference, and it cost you." For a second, I thought she might keep arguing out of habit, but the argument had nowhere left to land. The room had witnessed too much. She exhaled, a long, deflated sound. "Well," she said finally, "congratulations," and drifted away to a table that felt suddenly very far from the center of the night. When I turned back, my brother was in front of me. He didn't approach with a speech or with explanations about stress and timelines and the 1,000 little excuses that men in tight collars tend to reach for. He held out his hand instead, and when I took it, he pulled me into a hug that was not careful. "I'm sorry," he said again, words warm against my hair, "for letting anyone make you feel small, for not seeing quickly, for not moving faster." He pulled back, eyes bright, mouth tilted in that crooked apology he'd had since we were kids. "Thank you for staying, even when it hurt." "I stayed because you're mine," I said simply, "and because she chose me, too." I nodded toward his wife, now laughing with her father near the bandstand. "You chose the right person." We danced then, not a performance, just a sway, a shared memory in motion. Halfway through the song, he reached into his pocket and pressed something small into my palm. I looked down to find the old keychain we'd fought over as children, a tiny brass compass, scuffed and tarnished. We used to pass it back and forth whenever one of us got lost, literal or otherwise. "Your turn," he said, smiling. "You had it when Dad left. I had it through my bad years. I think it belongs with you now." The tiny needle twitched, then settled. North is north even after a storm. Later, when the cake had been cut and the band had slipped into a last late set, the bride pulled me to the center of the floor. She took the mic from the singer with a grin that dared anyone to deny her. "I just want to say one thing," she said to the room, voice ringing with that same clear certainty from the aisle. "Families are built, not just inherited. Today, we built ours out loud." She turned to me and placed her bouquet, loosened, fragrant, a little wild, into my hands, for the sister who stood outside the door and still chose love. The room rose to its feet as if pulled by one string. I didn't cry then. I cried later, when the lights were gentle and the hall had thinned, and the three of us, bride, brother, and me, sat on the edge of the stage with our shoes off, ankles cooling against the wood. We were quiet in the way people are when the noise has let go, and what remains is the thing itself. My brother squeezed my knee. The bride leaned her head on my shoulder. Outside, someone set off a single sparkler that winked and died. It was all smaller than a movie, and somehow more sacred for it. Before the night ended, our mother found us and tucked something into my hand. A folded card, soft at the edges from being opened and reopened. Inside was a photo of me and my brother, gap-toothed and sunburnt on a summer curb, sticky with melted popsicles, grinning like we'd invented joy. On the back, she had written, "The story didn't change." It continued, "I love you both, Mom." I kept the card, the compass, and the bouquet. I kept the sound of the bride's voice in the sanctuary, the exact timbre of the moment she refused to move without me. I kept the way the room shifted when truth was named, how oxygen returned, how laughter loosened. I kept the lesson, tooth one that will keep me steady, the next time someone smiles while redrawing the borders of my life. She tried to block me out of my brother's wedding, tried to make me a footnote in my own family. But in the end, love itself refused to move forward without me.